My base case has been for a while that the 2020s are going to be a more inflationary decade than the 2010s. Yeah, so if you look at the 70s, it's really about the type of inflation you're getting. And so in the 1970s, a lot of that inflation was coming from bank lending. And so basically, if you look at the demographics curve of the United States and much of the rest of the world, basically that was kind of like, a very high level of population growth, especially population coming into adulthood. And so there's a lot of kind of, household formation, bank lending, and then that was exacerbated by the fact that there was a fiscal deficit. But if you look at a long-term chart, the deficits were not massive compared to other parts of the history. It was that combination of that bank lending and then fueled by the deficits. Plus you had oil production in the United States peaked in 1970. And so you had a real world constraint that you ran into where you had to start importing your oil while you also had that very strong demand growth. And so there are a bunch of factors that led into that inflation, combined with the fact that you went off the gold standard, and so you'd lost that anchor. If you look at the 1940s, it's a much different story because the inflation was not driven by bank lending. It was driven by massive fiscal spending to obviously to fight World War II. But most of that spending is domestic, right? So you're funding factories, you're funding all this stuff, and when the war is over, you're repurposing those factories. You're doing GI bills to send people, 8 million people to college and technical schools and get them set up with mortgages, things like that. So basically, that was a very fiscal heavy environment. And also debt levels are very, very high, especially in the federal sector. And so when you had that very high inflation, they were unable to raise interest rates. They just had to hold rates low and let the inflation kind of burn away a lot of the debt. Whereas in the 70s, because debts as a percentage of GDP was so low, they were able to raise rates to try to combat inflation. And eventually, Volcker was able to do that. And so there are a bunch of different factors. If we look at the 2020s, so far it's more like the 40s in the sense that the debt picture looks very similar, and the inflation we're seeing is not coming from bank lending, but rather is coming from that fiscal sector, the fiscal spending. Basically a war on COVID, or a war on, however you want to phrase it. Basically, the president has referred to it as kind of wartime spending, right? That's kind of how they're looking at it. And that's how it's showing up in the long-term chart as well. So a lot of the money creation is not coming from banks lending, but from the fiscal sector spending it into the economy and then having a lot of their bonds, purchased on the secondary market by the Federal Reserve. I think the whole purpose was to basically be behind the curve because they know they cannot raise interest rates to say positive real levels, right? So if inflation is currently 6% official CPI, they can't raise it to 7% given how much debt and interest that would be on the debt. And so really it's about kind of an expectation management. They were kind of playing down. They were kind of saying it was going to be transitory. And that was clearly not the case, or at least, not as transitory as they thought. Now they're kind of, I think they're catching up and they're going to try to tighten. But they're tightening from a position of being behind the curve. And it's one of those things where it's not even clear that tightening would have much of an impact on inflation because the inflation is coming from the fiscal sector combined with real world constraints like supply chain issues and other things like that. And so I think they're going to try to tighten until something breaks. Either yield curve inverts or credit markets break, which is what happened in late 2018. That's kind of what made Powell have to, the famous Powell pivot where they were on autopilot and then credit markets broke for 6 weeks and then they were not on autopilot anymore. Or you could have a treasury market dysfunction like you saw in March 2020. I don't think we're close to that. So I would really watch credit markets and the yield curve to see what kind of things happen. But essentially, I think their mandate at this point, they have kind of the dual mandate and then they have kind of the underlying mandate. So the dual mandate is maximum employment and maintain, keep a lid on inflation. And with inflation way above trend, while a lot of the employment numbers are looking somewhat better, at least on the surface, I think they're clearly shifting towards that controlling that inflation side. Their third kind of, unstated mandate is to maintain financial stability. So you can't have treasury market go illiquid. You can't have high yield bond market go illiquid. And so they if you see kind of damage in one of those areas, they put out the fire there. So they're juggling all these different things. And right now, inflation is the one that they're getting heat for. And so at least for a period of time, that's the one they're going after to put that fire out. Yeah, basically there's a demand side and there's a supply side. And at any given time, supply is not infinite, right? It can't just change on a dime. And so we had basically a lot of fiscal stimulus, which gave everyone the ability to consume more. We increased everyone's demand in a world where we have real world constraints. And especially because people are locked down, some of the constraints are even tighter than before rather than increasing. And so that combination of that demand and that supply, the only way that the Fed tightening can potentially impact that is by reducing demand, right? If they make stocks fall, if they make banks lend even less than they are now, that can basically reduce consumer demand, and then ironically that can at least potentially in the temporary term kind of quell inflation.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information, and it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
I have bad news for you. If you're not rich by now, you're screwed. And if you're in debt, you're even double screwed. How so, you might wonder? Well, the sad truth is that you're working your whole life to make someone else rich. The mega corporations, the banks, the politicians, everyone is getting richer. They get your money. And what is even worse, they get your time, they get your life. You are not even in a rat race, you're in a financial prison. But what could a solution for you look like? Honestly, I don't know, but I know what a solution for me would look like. It's very simple. I use whatever money I have and I multiply it with 1,000. This could make my life much easier and probably yours as well. If you have $1,000 available and multiply this with 1,000, I believe that this could solve some financial issue for the one or the other. Of course, if you're ugly, you would have to multiply it with much more than 1,000. My name is Markus Dahn, and this is what I decided to do. I decided to 1000x my money. This is not a joke. I know what you may be thinking. What is this guy talking about? How should this work? This is not possible. Well, I made a detailed video where I laid out my plan. And some clever folks might even want to look at this plan and copy it and do exactly what I do. This is just a little hint on the side. You have two options. You leave, you forget what you have seen. You do whatever you're doing and you hope that somehow you get some other results. Good luck with that. Or you click the link below the video. You enter your email address because I'm not showing this to everybody. You at least watch my video on how I plan to 1000x my money. The choice is yours. Make the right choice. Join me. See what a different future you could have. See at least how I intend, how I plan to do the 1000x. So click on the link below, enter your email address, and I see you on the other side. Your Markus Dahn.